Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today and enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel and get early access to my videos, and make sure you check out my podcast in the description below. Let me know what's your favourite story out of these, and I have a quick message before the story starts, so I'd like to share this. Remember that if you're going through a hard time and you can't see the other end of it, that's normal. And when things are tough, it's often the way that our mind goes for some reason. I know for myself, I have to calm myself down and remind myself that things aren't as bad as they seem, and they usually aren't, and focus on what I need to do to get out of the situation, and then just be consistent and have balance and do the things that I enjoy. And then in no time, you'll start to feel much better and everything will turn around, I promise. So I hope that can help some people. Take care and enjoy these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. While working as a park ranger, I made a really weird discovery. Somewhere nestled away was a small bungalow-style building on the land that we had to cover. Now it's something that I actually hadn't noticed before, so this was interesting for me. I'd worked here for quite a number of years and decided that one day, while off duty, I was going to investigate it with one of my really good friends. We've been best friends for quite a long time and we're really excited about this specific adventure. We got a bit older now, so didn't constantly go out like this, so it was really nice to. While we head out, it's quite a nice autumn day, and everything's as it should be. While walking, we encounter a group of other people, and what's really strange is we see somebody wearing all yellow. They literally look like a monk. Now we can't be absolutely certain of this, but they were definitely out of place for where we are. They basically headed off a different direction than the one that we're in, so we'll never be exactly sure. It took us quite a long time to actually find the location too. It was nowhere near where it should have been. I don't know why, it was kind of weird because we seemed to have to walk for miles and miles and never actually got close to it. However, eventually, on the horizon in a clearing, we find it, and we were ecstatic. Now, we hadn't explored anything like this before, but there were rumours that there was a really complex system under here, so we're incredibly excited when we find a small wall that we can break into. I don't suggest doing this though, because to be honest, we were probably technically trespassing, and were vandalising. I mean, gosh, I work there too. But that isn't the point of now. So what happens is my friend actually goes in first because he's a bit smaller than me, so he finds it a lot easier to go through the clearing. We then wonder if this is just a normal house, as there seems to be no way to get any further. We're actually quite disappointed, until suddenly my friend says, "Hey, Bill, check this out." I turn and what do you know? There's one small hatch which has ladders down it. The ladder's actually extremely sketchy, to be honest. I don't know why I went down it first, but we actually make it. Then, we're met with a huge steel door. This thing was probably built during the Cold War. It was so cool to find it. There was quite a lot of graffiti around, so we definitely weren't the first people to discover this, but it was really interesting. There was all kinds of trash in the first part. Through the steel door, however, we're met with an extremely long corridor, concrete lined with random boxes around with markings that we couldn't read anymore. We thought this was crazy. We hadn't seen anything like it before. It was like stepping back in time in the 70s. There was a strange smell too. It kind of smelled like rotting something. We presumed that animals were using this as their home and probably had died or something, but it was pretty weird. Now we continue down the corridor, and that's when we get the first feeling that we might not be alone here. Every so often, we would hear some kind of banging sound on the walls. Now we couldn't figure out exactly what was making it, because we could never seem to get close to the source of the sound. But that was the first thing that was odd. We presumed that maybe there was other people down here, so we both turned off our torches for a short while and just listened. We don't hear much of anything, so just accept that it's probably just some kind of animals, or who knows, rats or something. We continue on, and suddenly my friend's torch goes off. Doesn't matter, I've got a spare one. Now what's specifically weird though, is that this is a very good torch. It's ones that the park rangers where I am are issued, so it basically never goes out. You can also recharge it, and I'm trying to do this constantly, but it doesn't make a difference. So that's really weird. Now we're down to just one, and I know we should have headed back, but for some reason, we're just too excited and motivated to press on. But we're not really finding much, just room after room which is completely abandoned, so we're starting to get quite bored now. The other issue is we weren't really tracking where we were going, so we're basically just going deeper and deeper into who knows what, where we're never going to have cell signal or anything. We eventually come up to one area which is cut off by some kind of wardrobe pressed up against where we are. We basically can't get through the doorway. It looks like somebody's tried to barricade it, but it didn't work. We start hitting the door and trying our very best to get in, but again, it doesn't make much of a difference. That's when my torch goes out and things get real. Almost instantly, there's some kind of high-pitched noise. It kind of sounds like a distant alarm or something. And we notice that the temperature's got so much colder than our surroundings should be. We were completely fine up until this moment, and now it feels extremely cold. Now it gets worse as we start to hear movement. It was almost like the second the torch went out, this place became alive, and we weren't alone any longer. So we explored deeper and deeper, trying now to get out, with my buddy finally getting his torch to come to life, but only extremely limited, and only for a few seconds at a time. Again, I've never seen anything like this before. Then suddenly, we hear it, the sounds of footsteps. We don't say anything, we start turning back in the opposite direction, but these footsteps sound very loud. They're definitely coming in our direction, and our torches just don't go on. We realise someone's here and we're not supposed to be, and we start going, following the lining of the wall trying to find our way out of here, but we just can't. We cannot seem to get away from whatever this is. It seems like they're not definitely going after us, but they seem to be searching room to room trying to find someone. I say them because it sounded like there might have been more than one, but I'm not sure. I try my very best to hold my breath as we round corner after corner, not really getting anywhere. Every so often the lights come on again, and it's cold enough that you can actually see mist forming when we're expiring, which is crazy. It wasn't like this before. Unless it started snowing outside, I don't see how this could have happened, but it's autumn and it's not likely where we are. Now I whisper to my buddy that we've got to get out of here, and we finally find the long corridor. We both stop for a few seconds and my torch comes to life again. I see the silhouette of somebody and I say, "Come on, what are you doing, Brian? Turn back." Then Brian says, "Dude," and I realise he stood right next to me as I see the silhouette of somebody coming towards us, but I don't know who they are. For a second I'm frozen and my torch goes out again. I scream out a swear word and hit it, and by God knows what luck, it comes back to life again finally. And now, it's extremely bright and nobody's there, but we can still hear footsteps coming towards us. I actually drop the torch in fear and it goes out once again. I swear, and we sprint, and we're following the length of the corridor. We follow this and we know it's the way that we come in. We turn around and now make it into the main latch that we have to go through, as this is going to lead to the ladders out of there. I'm going up at absolute record speed and actually cut my hand while doing so. I'm shaking now, and suddenly I'm almost blinded by the sunlight. I quickly jump through the small gap and so does my friend. We take a second to lay on the ground and let our breaths readjust. I can actually feel on my clothes how cold they are, and again it doesn't make sense. We sit there for a second staring at each other, and we can hear it. Footsteps following once more. This time you can hear them at the bottom of the stairs towards the latch where the ladder is. We both turn and bolt it out of there. We run and eventually see some other hikers who look at us like we're absolute madmen, but maybe we were. They did not know what we had seen or what we were running from. Eventually we get back to civilization and relative safety, but I don't know what to make of this. Since this day I felt like it's kind of robbed me of some of my creative or exploratory freedom. I'm so scared to go anywhere on my own now. Even while doing that job for a few more years afterwards, I could never go in that area. Even when I was sent out there to do things, I would just lie and kind of hang around the border of it. I don't think I've been the same since this encounter. This story that I'm about to tell is from a family friend who is passionate about the subject. Now the first actually happened in 2013. The family friend, we'll call him Joe to preserve his anonymity, it's a good choice, lives on the outskirts of town, about 5 miles away from the nearest gas station. There's quite a bit of a forested area, but most of it is private property. There's a house right across the street from this, so he's not totally isolated. Anyway, one evening, Joe got done picking squash from his garden. He had put it in a bucket and he left it on the side of the porch and forgot about it overnight. The next day, he went looking for the squash and realised that he left it outside. He went out on the porch and the bucket was gone. He didn't really think too much of it. He figured a raccoon had taken it. He did find it strange, however, that whatever it was had taken the whole bucket and that none of the squash had been spilled out. It was like something big actually carried it away but took some care to not spill any of it, as opposed to rummaging throughout like a raccoon would. A few days later, Joe came home from work to find a dead mouse on his doorstep, wrapped in a leaf and some grass. He looked at it for a moment in curiosity. The mouse had been meticulously placed inside of the leaf with grass made to look like a sandwich. He then began to think that maybe somebody was messing around with him, or maybe there was some kind of witch or something in the area trying to put a curse on. Nothing else happened for about a year until one night, Joe was sitting in his living room watching television when something out of the corner of the eye catches his attention through the window around the garden. He looked out and saw a figure hunched over and looking through his squash plants. He then went outside to confront whoever or whatever the thing was. When he got outside, he was surprised by just how little noise the creature was making. It was like it was trying to hide, and he took a step on his porch, causing the wood to creak and the creature to look up at him. He couldn't get a good look at his face, but there was a distinctive shine in its eye caused by it looking up towards his porch light. It stood up on 2 legs and he got a good look at its body. It was very large and bulky. He estimates that it must have been about 7 feet tall. It was black and hairy and man-like in its form. As soon as it saw him, it bolted away into the woods with lightning pace. It didn't make a sound really. There was no doubt in his mind that this is a Bigfoot, and Joe understood, understandably, that he was going to have trouble to fall asleep that night. As he laid awake, he begins to wonder if the creature had been in any way connected to the mouse that he received on the doorstep about a year ago. He said that he believed that the thing could have carried the bucket of squash. The next morning, Joe decided to try a little bit of an experiment. He took some turkey and rolled it up in a leaf and some grass, much like the mouse had been before, putting it on his picnic table out the lawn and gone for work. When he gone back, the turkey, the leaves and grass were gone. He studied the area, but couldn't find any signs of it. Not even the grass was disturbed as far as he could tell. Then he approaches his door, and on the doorstep is another mouse, this time decapitated, and instead of leaves and grass, there was a small pile of berries next to it. He's actually not seen the creature since then, but he really strongly believes that it's what's been swapping gifts with him. It continues to the present day. When he got a whole deer antler just 4 months ago, he started setting up trail cams to try and capture that thing on video. Whatever was leaving presents, but he couldn't find anything. He's still trying to catch it, and I'll keep you posted if he finds anything. He told me that sometimes it always feels like it's watching him and will intentionally not show up when he puts cameras up, but I don't know if it's that intelligent or if it's just not actually there. Who knows if this is a Bigfoot or what it is. This all happened way back in 2017 while I was camping with my friend. He had huge farmlands surrounded by forest. We were outside in the front of the farmhouse in a tent. He was asleep, but me always having insomnia, I was awake all of a sudden, but I can hear loud footsteps coming from outside of the forest over in the direction of the tent. This scares me because I don't know what it is. A bear? A deer? I had no clue. I was waiting for the footsteps to stop outside of the tent, and I was preparing myself for the worst because since the direction it's heading, I assume that this thing is a threat. I thought something was going to happen, but it didn't. Now, it's then heading in the direction of the other tents. That's what I assumed was going to happen. Now, it goes past my tent. After hearing these loud, slow, methodical footsteps coming out of the woods, ignore two defenseless kids, then silently pass for maybe 10 minutes, curiosity starts to eat away at me. When I was a kid, I was stupid, so I actually unzipped the tent and peeked my head outside to see if I can see anything. I'm looking all around the tree line, the house and everywhere, and I cannot find the source of the footsteps. I'm just about to put my head back inside when I spot something that doesn't really make sense to me. Behind the farmhouse to the right is the actual farm, and this is where this happened. I see a pole. I saw what looked like a 30 feet tall greyish silver pole standing next to this farm. It had this shiny glisten to it in the moonlight. I studied this weird structure up and down with my eyes confused because I knew well that I should have easily been able to notice this before, but I hadn't. It wasn't there. By the way, I called this thing a pole, but after looking at it really hard, I realised that it had arms and legs. They looked like rods, perfectly symmetrical and proportional with its size and stature. It looked so smooth and round, and it almost looked like it stretched out. It's hard to explain. It was spinning in a circle ever so slowly. I was dumbfounded and have no idea about what to think of this, and all of a sudden, this thing, this tall, shiny 30-foot spinning pole, suddenly took a step back into the woods, started spinning slowly, still glistening and shining in the moonlight. I had no idea how to react. I felt completely at a loss afterwards and just kind of went back to the tent and laid on my back until the sun comes up. I got no sleep at all after that day and never hung out with that friend again at the farm. I don't know what it is. Trick of the eye? A humanoid? Your guess is as good as mine. I believe I had an encounter in August 2005 when I was 19. I visited Point Pleasant with my friend and fiance. We were just kids being dumb. Thought it'd be a good idea to go and find the Mothman. We didn't even plan the trip out very much. We borrowed this old tent that belonged to my fiance's father, and I swear to God, it hadn't been opened since the 70s. When we made it into town, it was already dark. We stopped at a police station, and they're friendly enough, told us where to camp. Now we went down all these creepy back roads and seemed to get into more dark and desolated places while doing so. We were having a good time though, pretending to scare the life out of each other, as kids do. We're all driving down one back road just surrounded by woods. It's completely dark other than our headlights, and suddenly out of nowhere, we can see these two round eyes glowing in the sky. I know it sounds strange, but honest to God, it's what happened, and we're all terrified because of how high above the ground they are. We start screaming like girls and my fiance floored it. The initial shock and just feeling is one that doesn't escape me. My fiance recovered and wanted to set up camp. My friend and I thought that it wasn't a good idea and we refused to sleep anywhere near the woods. We ended up sleeping in the car in a hospital parking lot once we're back to civilization. We later found out the directions to the camping spot was in and around the TNT area. We had no prior information about such and barely planned it at all. We had breakfast at Biscuit World, that sounds good, the next morning and for whatever reason chose not to share our encounter with anyone. I guess we thought that nobody would believe us if we did. We left a day early since we didn't want to try it and sleep in the car in August again. When we got home, Hurricane Katrina had made its way all the way towards the Gulf Coast. It was all over the news. Now it just struck me though because a Mothman sighting is supposed to be the omen of tragedy and misfortune. I know it sounds crazy, but believe me, that's what we found that day. This took place in the summer of 2009. I was born and raised in the plains of Texas, specifically in an area where the black-eyed kid sightings are prevalent. I've heard the stories, tales and legends, whatever you want to call them, since I was young, but I never truly believed them. The black-eyed kids was something I was mainly entertaining as a joke or something. Now it was in a warm night in June. I was up late around 2 a.m. as I typically like staying up late, especially in the summer since it would stay fairly warm even after the sun gone down. I had just run up to the store to grab a big fountain drink and was returning into my home through the back door when I was approached by two children, a girl and a boy. I was very startled once I realised that they were there since I wasn't expecting to encounter anybody so late in the backyard. The little boy asked, "Can I come in? We need to use the phone and are lost." This is when I noticed the blackness of their eyes. Both of them had eyes that were so black they appear as though they're pits. Now this is also when my heart sank. I couldn't believe I was actually seeing them. They were literally right there in front of me. As I mentioned before, I heard the legends most of my life, so there was no way I was going to let them in my home. I darted into the back door and locked it as quick as I could. Once inside, I ran upstairs and flipped on the lights, trying to see if they're outside. Thankfully by then they're gone. I had so much adrenaline pumping by that point though that I grabbed a weapon and began searching the house, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. It took me hours to get to sleep that night and is still an encounter that stayed with me for the rest of my life. These entities took the form of something most people view as innocent, weak, mild, and tried to trick unsuspecting people to do God knows what to them. I'm just glad that my reflexes actually kicked in that day, and I'm still alive to be able to tell you the tale. A few years ago, I was outside with one of my friends after church. He looked at a nearby wooded area and saw what he claimed to be a pair of glowing eyes. This was at like 12 PM, so it couldn't have been an owl. The guy's also 2 or 3 years older than me and was really scared. I live next door to this church, so it scared the life out of me. Anybody know what it could have been? Now, I came across one of the reports concerning the black-eyed kids in Pennsylvania. My cousins and I had a very weird experience in September 2011. We both lived in the town of Wolverine, Michigan, and our dads are brothers. My cousin and I had been hunting and camping together since we were like 12 years old. We had graduated from high school that spring and planned to go camping later in the summer. We finally got permission to use my dad's pop-up camper and headed off. We planned to stay for a week or so at a place southwest of the city in the forest near the state park. We drove back into the woods about 4 miles off the main road and set off a small clearing. We both thought that the area looks familiar, but we can't recall exactly why. When we headed back there was this weird sound and feeling, and we both looked at each other. Now I don't know what it was, but it made us feel odd. We didn't really have much planned to do together in the area other than hike around. Both of us were going to move away from home the next spring, so we'd likely not see each other again. I'll be honest, the camping trip was really a good excuse to get away from my girlfriend for a bit. We didn't do that much on the first night other than drinking a few beers and talk. We were in our racks early that night. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We started at about 10 AM and headed west towards the lake. We'd been walking no more than an hour when we heard what sounded like somebody yelling up ahead of us. It didn't sound like they were in trouble, so we cautiously continued walking towards the sound. After about 10 minutes or so, the yelling stopped and we never saw anyone. I had a GPS with me, so I figured we'd be able to find our way back pretty easily. We did get crossed up a few times, but we got back to the campsite late afternoon. There was a small creek nearby, so we washed up and started making dinner. And we sat to eat, and there was the sound of something moving through the trees north of us. There were lots of small animals in the area, so we figured that's what it is. A few minutes later, we heard thrashing sounds like something was sweeping at a small tree and bushes. Since we were eating, I thought maybe a black bear got wind of our food. Whatever it was, it soon stops, but every once in a while it would start up again. That night, we could hear the sweeping sound coming off from the same area, which is really odd to us. The next morning it was quiet, so we walked in the direction that the sounds come from before. We didn't see anything, but it did look like something had been kicking up the ground in a few places. We walked back to the campsite and started to eat breakfast. I just wanted coffee, so I went into the pop-up and searched for a coffee cup. As I was there, I heard my cousin saying something. I asked what he wanted. He replied that I had better get out of there. I looked through the netting and there was a tall man with a black tracksuit on standing at the edge of the clearing. I stepped out and asked the man, "Can we help you?" He just smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you." My cousin and I looked at each other and kind of laughed, but he then starts going towards us slowly. I ask what he wants, but he stopped walking about 15 feet away. Right away I realised that his eyes are totally black, and the tracksuit that he has had caked mud and dirt on it. I asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm just taking a walk and meeting my people." By this time I was freaked out, and my cousin walked towards the pop-up. I knew he was going to grab his shotgun. The man got a serious look on his face, like he senses we are armed. So he turned and walked towards the woods, at the edge of the clearing, and turned and said, "I'll see you boys later," and made a laugh as he returns to the wilderness. We didn't need another confrontation like that, so we gathered up everything and hauled ourselves out of there. We did set up at another area, but it's about 70 miles south of there. We had an enjoyable couple of days, but when we get together, we still wonder who that guy was and what he wanted from us. Now for some context, this happened about 10 years ago on a hill southwest from Branquilla, Colombia. I'm kind of skeptical about a lot of things, but this, I'm absolutely sure that what I saw was real. I was camping with my Boy Scout troop in a not so friendly place. Very hot, really rough terrain, awfully humid. Our troop was more like military service than scout life. It was kind of far enough away from the main road, and the main base was in a tree covered hill. I think that could be worth noting that it was less than 5 kilometers from an indigenous sacred site known as the Sacred Territory of the Creator, and probably it was a sacred site also, but I don't know, since the tribes that inhabited the area were forced by the Spanish to abandon their belief, traditions and language. So there's a lot of things that we don't really know about. Even I being descendant from them. It was 3 p.m. We sent 3 people to the dishes after lunch. There was a small lagoon about 5 to 10 minutes downhill. It shouldn't have took more than half an hour for them to get back. An hour passes and they haven't returned. Knowing them, surely they're just having trivial fun or something and gossiping, but as a patrol leader, I have to call them back. They didn't respond to whistles, so I personally went down there to find them. The way to the lagoon is mostly a 2.5-foot path between a steep hill and a dry river that has dense vegetation. Now, I was walking carelessly until I noticed something behind a curve. At first I thought it was a massive vulture, but I felt uneasy, so I started going back in silence until I stepped over a dry branch. After the crackling, that thing extended its wing, showing a massive muscular humanoid back and a head that watches me. Then it took the sound of more like a helicopter than a bird. Nonsense, I thought, trying to come up with a rational explanation to this. Maybe it's just my imagination. I then arrived to the lagoon, and effectively, they were having the most boring and dumb of conversations. I told them to pack everything and start going back to the campsite when all the troops come out of the tree-covered area and told me that I was taking too long. But my encounter couldn't have been more than 5 seconds or so. Anyway, there was a boy who said I'll go in front and entered to the woods alone. 5 seconds later, I heard the same helicopter-like sound, and the boy came running back, hyperventilating, saying that he saw a giant birdman. Everybody laughed, but I didn't say a word. Now, today I'd like to share my story that happened quite a number of years ago, though the feelings have never really left me. I'm somebody who spent a lot of time working out in nature. I was a park ranger, so I'd always done things outside. I mean, not just while I was at work, but for other reasons too. I remembered I had some friends that were really begging me to go out to the desert with them. I had this best friend called John, and he was the one who was the most up for it. He kept on telling me about all of these crazy experiences that he had out in this particular area of the desert. He said that he would see these people, well, he kind of describes them as some kind of beings or something, and I don't know, it was linked to UFOs and things, and I'm actually sure that I saw a UFO once. I was on top of one of our towers that you use for lookouts, and I saw a light in the sky that almost appeared red then purple, then suddenly split off in 4 different directions with different sections of it going the different ways. So yeah, I was kind of up for this. I was a little skeptical. I mean, even though I'd seen a UFO, I didn't really trust my eyes, and being out there and being so bored at times, I guess your mind plays tricks on you. But this friend John kept on and on going on about it, and eventually I decided to agree. He said it was kind of like a spiritual place that you could go to, and pretty much you'd be able to talk through all of your problems with these beings and that everything would be okay. Now, don't ask me why I actually agreed to do this. I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking at the time. I'm not someone who really gives into peer pressure too. He'd actually been going on about this for ages, and I don't know, I felt bad for always saying no, so we set out on one particular day. We parked up and made sure that we have all of our water with us, and we set off. Now, we had some camping gear with us, so we're going to be okay as long as the water didn't run too low. We decided that we'd never go far from where we parked, so that way we can always go back and get more supplies if we really need them. So with that, off we went. Now, the first area that we're going in, you can see lots of different tire tracks, and apparently, according to John, this wasn't good because it meant other people would be around, but he told me not to worry too much about this. The area that we're in is actually pretty nice. We're kind of flanked by hills, and there's kind of like a mountainy part up ahead of us. It looks really cool though, to be honest. And we continue on our hike. Now John's actually a really good friend, and he's genuinely one of the only people that actually understands me and is very similar with me in life. We have had a few arguments, but just over silly things, and I guess this guy was more of a brother than my actual brother to me at times. Now that meant we would talk about everything. Often it was about relationships and other things that had went wrong in our lives before, and the more we spoke, I guess the more that we realised we're similar. And again, I didn't actually know just how similar we were. I mean, heck, it was pretty unbelievable, but I won't share too many details here about that, just because it kind of goes into some of the darkness that we both seem to experience somehow at the same time, almost living opposite lives, but parallel emotionally. So we talk through everything, and he says that we're not too far from where we need to get to, and that's when we encounter the first group of people. Now they do seem a little bit weird at first. John also seems a little bit hesitant, but he ends up going up to them and starts talking. It turns out that they're here for the same reason, and although they seem a little bit weird, we decide to try and talk to them. I wasn't sure if one of them was on something, but he just seemed too talkative. They tell us that they've got something they want us to drink, and apparently they made some nice bush tea for us. Who was I to say no, and I end up drinking it. We exchange a couple of snacks, and it was actually a really good time. Now we'd been with these guys for quite a while, and eventually decide that it's time to leave them and go on. Now we continue on our way, and you can actually see that the path is marked by different rocks that people have put there, so we know that we're not going anywhere too dangerous or anything. My friend John constantly reminds me to drink lots of water, and I keep doing so. I seem to get a headache now, which I really can't fend off for some reason. I have pretty sensitive eyes though. I can't even look at the ground when it's bright without sunglasses, without my eyes being strained. I also get this weird thing where I kind of see like flashy lights or something, but I know what it is. It's not a migraine, but I guess it's just my eyes going weird. Sometimes I'll see a strange bright colour too, but I guess that doesn't matter too much. We come up to one part of the hike where there's quite a big drop on the left hand side of us. If we're going to fall now, we're going to be in trouble, so we really try our best to avoid this. My friend then says that we haven't got too much further to go before we get to the people, and that's when we encounter some rangers. That's really odd, I think. There shouldn't be any rangers up here whatsoever. I don't know what they're doing, and we just say hi, and don't really think much of it and just keep going. They seem a little odd, but I wasn't paying too much attention. That's when my buddy John says, "Did you notice something?" I say, "No, what's that?" He says, "Well, those guys looked almost exactly the same as each other, and I don't know, something just felt really off about them." I didn't really notice it, but trying to think of it, it almost felt like they didn't have much of a facial expression, almost like they were wearing a rubber mask, but I can't really tell. They eventually go off a little bit further, and we don't think too much of it as they slowly go out of sight. I then explained that I've heard about some twins who become park rangers in an area not far from where I was working at the time, and that, yeah, it's just basically a normal thing that you will get stuff like this. You know, you get families who are raised in the outdoors like me, and that's what the families want to do, jobs like ours. And my buddy John tells me not to worry too much and makes a joke out of it. And I tell him, "Hey, I'm not the one worried here," and we press on. Now my friend keeps on talking to me about this thing and how great it's going to be, and eventually we set up the tents. We do this, and I keep on slamming my water. One thing that's weird is that I haven't really had the urge to urinate too much yet. Usually I'll be going like every 10 seconds almost, but I don't really feel the urge to. I guess it was hot, but the weird thing is it's not really too hot now. There's kind of an overcast in the clouds, and it means that it's not really warm, it's actually a little bit cold. But John says, "Hey, come on man, we've got to go up to this before sundown, because this hill is where you're going to see it." Now, I was either convinced that he was just off his head, or there were actually aliens here. We're nowhere near Roswell, so it wasn't anything like that. But I don't know, I've given him the benefit of the doubt. Talking to this friend though was honestly like a therapy in itself. It was almost like the ideas that I had, my friend could give me, and the ideas that he had, he could give me, and it would kind of complete each other. Not in a weird way, but just kind of like a nice bond and friendship. So yeah, it's getting a little bit dark, and I keep telling my buddy that we have to remember where the tent is because we're not going to see it. My friend doesn't take much notice of me and keeps on going. Now, he says that he's going to continue on, but I say that I feel like I need to stop for a bit. I don't know why, but suddenly the headache becomes absolutely overwhelming. Now, my friend continues on and I just let him go. Now, I feel extremely tired suddenly and I don't want to sleep, but you know when you try and lay on your side and not sleep, you know what happens? Yeah, you end up sleeping. Now, that was exactly what happened to me. I managed to wake myself up a couple of times, but I kind of drift off again. It's almost like I've got an alarm clock in my head, but I permanently had it on snooze and I wake up again. When I woke up, I felt like I'd slept for ages and almost like I'd had the best night's sleep of my life, but everything felt different now. I get up and look at the sky, and it's kind of got like an orange hue to it, and I continue on the trail and try and find where my friend is. For some reason when I wake up, I suddenly feel much more peaceful. I wasn't concerned about finding my friend and I presumed that he just left me there to sleep and went back to the tent, so I decided to go on myself. I drank quite a lot of water again and I was actually running out in my first tank, which is surprising. Again, no urge to urinate, which I think is really weird, but I keep going. Now, as I'm walking, I can hear a strange humming. It was almost like a kind of energy is the best way I can describe it. I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I knew I should keep going, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this is what John was telling me about. And I thought in the back of my head, maybe this is him up here making those sounds. I decide to continue, and I make it a bit further now. The guy's actually quite tough here, and the terrain's quite rocky now. I'm not too happy about this because I keep on whacking my shins when I'm trying to go up this thing. And also I keep getting little branches and things that are cutting up my ankles. But for some reason I'm not too bothered by this, and that's weird too because usually I'm really worried. As I get higher and higher up, I realise something weird now. I seem to be talking to myself in my head kind of far too much. It's quite weird. It goes from very positive to suddenly very negative, and it keeps on switching between the two. And that's when I realise that something's different about the sky. The colours seem off and the sky just seems far too bright. Now, I think this is really bizarre, but nothing too much to worry about. Again, I wasn't really thinking straight at this time. Now, I end up just walking and walking, and I don't necessarily have a destination in mind. I don't know how far I was gone for, but I see my buddy up ahead of me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, John, and he keeps on walking around the corner. I think, God, you're such an idiot. My foot was starting to hurt now, and I can't be bothered to walk quicker, but I practically force myself to power up towards him. I eventually make it there, and I realise something strange. He's just vanished. I try and figure out where that he's actually gone to, and I walk up the hill and look over it, and there he is again. John! John, I scream out, but he doesn't listen. What's weird is that he just keeps on and on walking, but he seems to be far too far away from me. Even if he sprinted down this hill, he shouldn't have been able to get this far, and I suddenly realise that I can't see him any longer. I think this is odd, and I look around, and suddenly I've realised that there's a few more people around. There's quite a lot up on a ridge, and they're all waving at me, trying to get me to come over to them. I can see that they brought some kind of dirt bike with them, and I put my hand on it, but I decide to leave it because it's theirs. I think that this is a group that we've seen earlier, so I start to go further and further. And my god, do I have a bad migraine or something, because my eyes are going a bit funny. I'm kind of seeing the weird colours again, but my vision's definitely a bit off now. I try not to think too much of it, and I reach down and realise that there's all water over my hand. I quickly start slapping around trying to figure out where the source of it's from, and notice how cold my hand is, when I realise that suddenly my hand isn't wet and it's in my head. I'm not aware that something's off at this point, and I just thought it was lucky that there's no water here. I then open up my bag and start drinking, and I realise that the heavens have opened up now. There's rain falling all around me, and it feels quite nice to be out of the desert sun. Now, I eventually make it up to the hill where all the people are waving, and it seems like they're being very friendly to me, saying good things and encouraging me. I stop to get a bit of breath and rest my legs for a few moments, and I say, "Hey guys, wait for me, I won't be long." And that's when I realise that my vision's gone a bit weird. It almost feels like I'm going backwards now, but I'm not. I take a few deep breaths and I become very, very conscious of my breathing and the rain around me. This calms me a lot, and I think the deep breathing did me some good. And I'll continue on and make sure that I can see my new friends at the top of the hill. There seems to be less and less of them now, and I eventually make it all the way up there. Now when I get to the very top, suddenly something changes. It's almost like they've all just appeared around me suddenly, but as I look at them, their faces seem off, and I suddenly notice that there's something very inhuman about them. Now, their faces look much more scary, and suddenly they morph into some kind of dark figures which tower over me. I mean, it starts off with about my height until they're about 2 or 3 times taller, and suddenly they surround me. But for whatever reason, I don't feel afraid and I don't feel scared of anything. I kind of notice that they're around me, and because I can't see now, I kind of lose my balance and fall over for a second. When I fall over, I'm staring back up at the sky now. I don't feel any pain or anything, but I can see lightning bolts all around me, and the rain picks up a lot more. I wiped my eyes trying to figure out what was happening when I eventually managed to get myself up off the ground again. I'm looking around and the figures are gone. I think, my god, did I encounter them? Was that it? What did I get out of this? Did I learn anything? Did I see anything? Are they actually there? And I think that this can't necessarily be anything that I actually believe's there. And I decide that I should keep looking for John. It suddenly clicks again. Now, that's when I start to get a bit scared. I have a sudden feeling of panic, and the more that I panic, the worse I feel, and I start picking up the pace more and more. And I start to see these beings again. These are different from the ones that I've seen earlier, and they seem a lot more malicious and malevolent. The further I go, the closer they seem to come towards me. It gets to a point where I honestly feel like there's an army of them behind me, and I don't dare look around. I'm not sure how long this went on for with this weird feeling of being followed, but my god, it must have been a long time. And I can tell you that I did not feel good during 1 second of it. I was trying to loop my way back round to where the tent should be, but to be honest I had no idea of where I was going. Now, as you can imagine, this is incredibly dangerous out in the desert, especially if you're on your own, but I wasn't thinking of that. I remember eventually I was able to stop and turn around, and they're gone again. I look up in the sky for UFOs, and the stars seem to be too bright, and there seems to be too many of them. I wipe my eyes and it's rain again. I realise something's definitely off now. I start trying to hit my head, not hard, just enough to make sure I'm awake, but yes, I am. Now suddenly things seem to go straight back to normal. The raining stopped now, which I'm pretty happy about, and I continue now, but I'm no longer on the path. I'm going towards some kind of darker area now, where the sun seems to be far from me. I get here and I feel like I'm on a barren wasteland, and I call out for John. All I'm met with is echoes, and I'm convinced that he's back in the tent. I say, John, you better be in that tent and I better find you there. And I start trying to go downhill now, and that's when I fall. I don't know how it happened, but I can only imagine that my foot got snagged on a rock, and I actually fall quite a bit down, tumbling. I fall asleep again, and now I wake up and John is prodding me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, what are you doing? Confused as to who it is. And that's when I see it. One of the dark beings has found me, and there's a sea of stars behind him. And he takes me by my hand and lifts me up. Now, as he's lifting me up, I realise that I'm in some kind of different area again to where I thought I was. For some reason, this being seems a lot more friendly than the others, and seems to be guiding me away from wherever I was before. I look back and I can see the army of the others once again, and this thing just demands without saying anything that I look forward, and that's exactly what I do. Now, I keep going down pretty treacherous terrain, but this thing seems to be really helping me get through. Now, as weird as it sounds, I was pretty much having a full-on conversation with this thing in my head. It spoke in almost like a hushed tone, but kind of with more reverberation. It was like every time that it spoke, I would hear things and feel it through my body. I was asking where we were going and it said to safety, and I kept asking what's happening and it kept saying don't worry, don't worry. Now I'm not sure when it happened, but this being, whatever it is, left me, and it was up to me to continue the rest of the journey. I look around and it's much further away now, pointing, trying to usher me to go forwards, and I follow it. I'm now walking pretty close to some kind of crevasse or something. Almost like a very, very small Grand Canyon's probably the best way that I can describe it, but maybe not grand because of how small it is. Again, I'm going on a pretty sheer rock face, and how I don't fall at this point is beyond me. I know that my fall was definitely real though because of the blood on my white socks. Now, it doesn't take too much longer, and a miracle happens. I can see the tent, and it's where it should be, and I can see the silhouette of something or someone in it. Is it my friend? What is it? I think to myself. Now, I'm pretty much glued to the spot, and I realise that I've been asking myself this over and over again in my head for God knows how long, until eventually I decide that I've got to will myself forward, and it's almost like I've got to will one foot ahead of the other. I eventually make it there and open the tent, and John's there. I say, John, what are you doing? He says, hi, you're back. I was getting worried about you. I say, what do you mean? He said, I thought you said you were going to come back soon and we're going to take a leak. I say, I didn't say that. You were just going up the hill. And he looks at me very confused. I then tell him about the beings, and he tells me that he saw some too, but he wasn't sure what to think of it because he was quite tired and thought it was a dream. He then tells me that he thinks what he saw was me and called out, but I didn't reply, so he told me to meet me back at the tent, and he fell asleep. I decided not to tell him exactly what I'd seen, and I ended up crashing out. Now, I woke up again the next morning, and my God did I feel terrible. My body felt like absolute crud, and I decided the best thing to do is slam lots of water. I feel a lot better, and suddenly my heart starts pounding. Suddenly, all of my senses come flooding back to me, and the fear, this terrible fear of realising what had happened the night before, comes back to me. I let out a loud gasp and grab my friend John, who is still sleeping. I shake him awake, and it looks like he's just seen a ghost because of the way that I've awoken him. I then explain everything that happened to him, and that's when it hits us. Something was definitely off last night. I explain my story, and he then tells me his, and we weirdly both describe the beings as being almost exactly the same as each other, and we have this horrible feeling of dread, like something's really off. My friend John now realizes that he definitely didn't understand what actually happened to me, and that it's weird because we have different stories of how we lost each other. We decide that we need to go back and make sure that we stay nice and hydrated because we're going to move quick, and we quickly pack up the things. Now, I can't describe to you the feeling of dread that I had when I packed up everything and I start heading back with John. I was absolutely convinced that it was paramount that we were about to be followed by those beings. Now, I have to tell you, in this moment, it was so real. What I'd seen and experienced is truly like nothing else I've ever seen on Earth before. And I don't know, in the moment I was kind of in this trance, so I just guess I went along with it. I remembered every time that I'd see a bush or tree that was darker than the rest, I almost had a mini heart attack. But I kept going. I didn't have a choice. The weird thing is too that the landscape all looked different from the way we'd come in. Luckily though, John knew the way, and eventually we make it back to the rocks which had been put there by others to mark the way. Now neither of us say anything. We're both very paranoid and constantly looking around, trying to see if there's anything there, or any kind of explanation for what we'd just seen. We start talking a bit, and that's the more scared we get, the more we try and match up what had happened. Now, eventually we do make it back, and my god, getting back to being inside a vehicle was probably the best feeling in the world. I was actually so shaken up that I couldn't drive though, and I just had to lock the doors and just lay in the seat for a while, trying to think of what had happened. Had we been drugged? My buddy John then says that he thinks that we were probably drugged, and that those guys probably spiked us with something that we ate or drank. He said it sounded like a weird drug that he had heard about before that can make you hallucinate, and apparently the plant for it and seeds are actually quite common in nature, and he thinks they probably got it from here and thought it'd be funny to do it and not tell us. I was convinced of the same thing because the whole thing just felt so weird. God, how could they be so evil to us? I mean, we literally could have died. We could have ended up like those hikers who went out into the wilderness and just disappeared. What really worried me is the fact that we got separated out here, completely out of our minds, both of us. Now, anything could have happened to me. I checked for bruises and I didn't have a headache or anything, but I could have easily fell, hit my head, and got brain bleeding or something. I don't know, it's just too easy to happen out here. But the thing that neither of us understand is, how do we get back? We both agree that we're probably miles away from each other at some point, because at the very least, we should have heard each other screaming out, but we didn't hear a thing. And the rest of the drive back was a pretty weird one. This is when the both of us discovered that we had also seen the rain before, but the area around us didn't seem to be too wet. I mean, yeah, it is a desert, so it could have just evaporated, but I don't know. It just felt a little bit different somehow. And eventually we get back. Now we make it to John's mum's house, and John's mum says, "God, you guys must have seen it. Surely you guys seen it, tell me you did. It was right where you guys were staying." We look at each other very concerned. Was this the first that the beings had been actually reported or what? And his mum then says, "Did you see the UFO? I saw it. So many of our neighbours saw it." I say, "What do you mean?" Getting a little bit angry. She says, "The UFO, so many of us saw it. Those weird flashing lights in the sky. It was almost like a big triangle with red glowing orbs under it. It went over to roughly where you guys were staying in the desert. Then a few more appeared, and it was there in the same place for about a good half an hour." My heart drops now. Apparently it was accompanied by a quick storm, and suddenly they just shot off, never to be seen again that night. Apparently hundreds of people had all seen the same thing, and the timeline pretty much matched up to when we got over there. Now, me and John looked at each other, and we went off into his room and sat down for a while. We made some tea, and just kind of stared at each other, not knowing what to say. Now, it's been quite a while since this experience, and I don't know, I could have very easily been drugged with my friend, but the fact that a lot of what we had seen matched up with each other, and the other fact that so many people had seen something in the sky that night exactly where we are, it just seems a little bit weird. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know.